I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses and all of Sarah J. Maas's books. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk. Welcome, everybody, to our Nerdiest Thing. We are talking today about chapters 3 and 4 of A Court of Thorns and Roses. Before we get into our summary, Mindy is going to give us our nerdiest vocabulary.
So for these chapters, there really wasn't a whole lot, but there was one thing, and it's because I don't listen to these at all. Like, I've never been like a listener of books. I just can't. I don't have the attention span. So you all might be able to help me with this. I'm just curious. Is it Children of the Blessed or Children of the Blessed?
Children of the Blessed.
That was what I was thinking. All
Doesn't
right.
that sound way creepier than Children of the Blessed?
And I feel very validated at this moment.
We're going to just move right on to our nerdiest 30-second recap, where we draw names out of a hat, aka my hand, and the person's name that gets drawn has to do a 30-second summary. Let's draw, shall we? Whitney's getting her phone out like she's not going to have to do it. She's just timing
get the
people.
Timer, yeah. Mm-hmm. I can time myself.
If I get picked again, I'm not going next week. It's Mindy. All right, Whit, tell her when we're ready to go.
Okay, so we open up and Feyre and her sisters are going to the market to sell the wolf pelts. There they meet the Children of the Blessed, and they're religious fanatics, and they're really weird. Then they go and sell the wolf pelts. Actually, Feyre just goes to sell the wolf pelts to the mercenary, and she tells her a lot of freaky stuff. Then they go home, and when they get there, a big old nasty fey beast comes in and yells at everybody about their murderers. So then Feyre has to leave with him.
Out of time. Nice. Nice. That was really, really good. You didn't even get flustered like I did and start laughing in the middle of it.
I will not be giving that much detail when it's my turn to do the summaries. I would just be like, she went and talked to somebody, and then she went home, and then Tamlin was there. The end. Oh my God. That is like,
I know there was a person around Feyre.
So before we really get into the chapters, Deb did some deep diving research on the Fae and on Lycan too, right? Lycanthrope?
Really more around the wolven lore. So a little bit about the Fae and the wolven, and both of you please pop in with anything that comes to mind as I'm talking about this, but just some background on the Fae. So Fae are typically regarded as a natural but hidden species, and in a lot of folklore, they're known as spirits or descendants of angels or demons, which I did not realize. As we know, they're uncharacteristically beautiful. They live in an area where two worlds connect, like the forest, and some mythology has the Fae living in the other world, where the colors are brighter, characters are strange, and time is inconsistent. So, Mindy, you'll love this. Alice in Wonderland is said to be a really great example of the other world that a lot of people have talked about the Fae world in.
That's really interesting.
So, Alice in Wonderland is Mindy's favorite of all time. So, as we know, Fae are considered mischievous and violent. So, the only reason they really want to touch a human is if they've ruined a fairy place. And as we see, Feyre has killed a wolf. They're not to be interacted with. You're never supposed to go into a bargain with a Fae. As we know in book 2, Feyre is told several times not to bargain as she goes under the mountain. And Whitney just read the Folk of the Air series, all 3 books in a day and a half. And so she also knows you're not supposed to bargain with Fae from that series. And something really important to remember about Fae when you are bargaining is there are no gifts. Each transaction is two-sided. You're not getting anything from the fairy if they don't want something back from you. So in other books, and this is really the only series I've not seen this done heavily in, is that fairies are derived from 2 courts, one being the Seelie court and one being the Unseelie court. The Seelie court are made up of loving and honorable fairies, while the Unseelie are hostile and wicked. So I did want to look up and see which courts I thought all of the ACOTAR, courts fell into, and I forgot and ran out of time. So to be discussed via Instagram later. As we talked about last time, iron or salt at the doorstep are supposed to keep fairies at bay. And we know that Feyre's father was conned by a man that warded the house against fairies. And as we see in chapter 4, does literally nothing to keep Tamlin out of that house. Fairies can heal you, which I thought was super interesting. And as we see under the mountain later in this book, Feyre does get healed by the High Lords under the mountain. One thing we haven't seen so much in these books, but one thing I wanted to ask you all if you've thought much about is in most fairy lore, they are not able to tell lies. So have we noticed any time in this series that one of the fairies has outright lied and not wordsmith lied?
It's interesting you brought that up because I actually had in my notes in really big letters, fairies don't lie. Why do I always forget this? I honestly can't think of another time where I've heard that. Doesn't mean it's not there.
Right. So I think I'm going to be keeping my eyes open from that moving forward. Whit, did you have one that you were thinking of? Yeah. In any of the court books, do we see fairies lie?
Well, I know that later in this first book, I'm almost positive that Lucien and Tamlin tell her, yeah, that's not true.
That's like someone else said something?
No, that she says, obviously, like, iron didn't do anything to help my family. Like, is it even true that iron hurts you? Is it even true that you can't tell a lie? And they're like, yeah, no, those aren't real. I'm almost positive that conversation happens later in this book.
Well, we'll have to look out for that. Okay, so something that I found very, very interesting while researching fairies this week is how to tell that there may be fae nearby. So one of them would be seeing flickers of light near flowers or plants or often off in your peripheral vision, having new plants grow around your home, and sudden burst of a floral scent. So as we know, Elaine is said to be one with the flowers. So I find this very interesting. And as of, September 2022, we still don't know who Elaine is, what she brings to the series. We know she might be a seer, but was she seeing the Fae all along and just didn't tell anybody? She seems very scarred from like the first page of this series as someone who like literally cannot handle life, tremors violently all the time when she gets scared, is always hiding behind Nesta or Feyre. And so I want to really see where we go with that.
Well, that also kind of brings up what we talked about last week with the mystery of their parents, the Archeron parents and the mom, because Elaine's got all her weird seer stuff and all the weird connections to the flowers like you're talking about. But then you have Feyre, who becomes, a high lady who has all this power because the High Lords gave it to her. And is it just because the High Lords gave it to her, or is it because it's Feyre that they gave it to? And then you have Nesta, who becomes so super powerful because she somehow stole power from the cauldron. So these three sisters have abilities that they maybe not necessarily shouldn't have, but other people don't.
Right. And I do worry a little bit about Elaine's character in the books because, as we know, Sarah J. Maas doesn't do anything on accident. And I feel like she is about to fuck some stuff up.
I will say that if Elaine does sort of know about the Fae, if what you're saying is true, if she already kind of knows stuff about them, then she's even more of an asshole than I thought she was if she's not going to like share that information.
I mean, yeah, I guess so. But wouldn't you think that if I came to you and I was like, okay, I don't want to freak you out, but I was in my garden today, I saw a fairy. I didn't talk to it because I've heard they're kind of assholes. But, I'm not crazy. I promise, I swear.
I mean, maybe.
That would bring a whole new layer of complexity to her relationship with Grayson later on in the third book. Because his whole family, Lord Grayson, the human, and his dad is all about like hunting out the Fae and getting rid of the Fae. Like if Elaine has had some kind of knowledge or connection to the Fae this entire time before she was turned, then that brings a whole new level of like what's going on with her and Grayson. Like what is that dynamic? What is that relationship?
Right, because if she was terrified by them, maybe that was why she saw him as a nice choice as a spouse, right? But then, as we know later, he completely dejects her once he figures out what's really going on. And Whitney, thank you for your wealth of knowledge, because I totally thought that was this book. Apparently, we've got to wait a little bit for that relationship to come up.
Book 3.
Well, thank you. Okay, so 2 other things about Fae is whenever Fae are nearby, you're supposed to see an excessive amount of wild animals. And one thing I noticed in this chapter, in chapter 3 primarily, is that the mercenary is telling Feyre that she has talked to a gentleman that is essentially fleeing the area, and he has said that over the last 50 years there's been an abundance of wild Fae, violent Fae in the area. And as we know, that's been the 50 years of Amarantha's reign. I cannot wait to get under the mountain. I find that so exciting, and I'm like, okay, Tamlin, hurry up and be an asshole so we can get under the mountain a little bit. So the other thing is that Fae are supposed to appear in your dreams. And another thing that we see, I think it might be book 3 or 4 or 5 for all I know. But we see where Rhysand tells Feyre that he had been dreaming of her. And as we have found out, we also know that Feyre was dreaming of the stars and starlight and essentially the city of Valaris. And so there's all these things that were kind of indicators that the Fae were very close to this village.
And something that I just piggybacking off of that, something that I kept remembering reading these chapters is that was happening with Rhysand right now, like at this point in the books, like
right.
It had already happened. He's already having these weird dream visions of like somebody that because for a while, based on his retelling of it, he doesn't have any idea. Like he sees hands and he sees hay and he sees the dresser and the painting on the dresser, but he doesn't really see her at all. And I just think it's really interesting. Like she's going through all this and experiencing all this, you know, her whole world turns upside down in these 2 chapters. And at the same time, he's under the mountain having these weird dreams about hay. You know what I mean? I just think that's interesting.
That's weird because the only reference to hay in these chapters is essentially her role in the hay with Isaac Hale. Yeah. So can you imagine seeing your future like soulmate, you know, just rolling in the hay with some random dude who she points out really is not even that good in bed.
Right. Well, and later on she has those really like erotic kind of laced dreams about Amarantha after Under the Mountain that some people have theorized is maybe Rhysand's memories, Rhysand's experiences that she's dreaming about. So like they're both kind of having that weird subconscious, I'm seeing my person experiencing somebody else that isn't me. It's just weird.
I know that we talked about Mad Schofield last week. She's an amazing illustrator. She's on Instagram, but she just did an amazing drawing of the night of Starfall. As we know, Rhysand was named Amarantha's whore, and she used him as a sex slave for 50 years. And there is kind of this like after photo of him looking like distraught on the bed with Amarantha's hand over his shoulder, just with the ring with the eyeball in it. It is so good, so creepy. You should definitely check it out.
I kind of want to add something interesting that I picked up about Isaac and Rhysand, and as far as Feyre's preferences, I guess. Isaac is described as relatively handsome, soft-spoken and reserved with, and this is the quote that I'm talking about, a sort of darkness running beneath it all that had drawn us to each other.
I noticed that too.
Right? Like, I feel like that's sort of like Feyre has a type, and it's a little bit of a foreshadowing to Rhysand. I thought that was really cool.
Feyre and I might have the same type.
I read that totally differently. I didn't think about Rhysand at all. I thought more about what Feyre was saying about herself in the first 2 chapters, about how she is so jaded and like there's no such thing as hope, and she doesn't know if it's her that's more wretched or if Nesta's the worst one. Like I took it more that way. I didn't think about Rhysand at all, but there's a lot of kind of parallels, I guess, to him and how he sees himself too, the same way.
So we find out in chapter 4 that a wolf comes into the cabin, right? So if you look at Fae lore, a type of Fae is called a changeling. So we know that the wolf is a changeling because he can go between an animal form and a human form. So before I talk about wolves, did you know that a group of changelings is called a motley? So I want to create a shirt that says Motley Wolves on it. I just think doesn't that sound, I mean, I know there's Motley Crue, the band, but Motley Wolves just sounds like completely punk rock. Okay, so a quick rundown about wolves. Wolves are associated with witchcraft, much like fairies. They're, a part of the underworld. They're seen as, spiritual beings. Wolves are natural predators, as we see, and have been seen as symbolic to the wild, untamed parts that we see in ourselves. So one of the most popular wolf legends is one of Amarok, and I'm not real sure how to say that. I'm really sorry. So Amarok is known as a trickster wolf god. He's described as a gigantic gray wolf who hunts alone, and he has extremely heightened senses, enabling him to devour anyone foolish enough to hunt alone. So the big bad wolf that we hear of in Little Red Riding Hood is known as an Amarok legend. He sometimes is seen as positive, which is a little bit of symbolism towards how Tamlin felt about seeing his friend get killed. And I believe one of you is going to talk about it later, but we later find out that this wolf was kind of Tamlin's last-ditch effort to find someone to fall in love with him before the 50 years was over. So another popular wolf lore that you've heard a lot about is the story of Lycan, which was actually a man that the god Zeus changed his children into wolves as punishment and then figured out that he could never change them back. So that's where the word lycanthrope comes from. Two really cool things that I noticed that are just, a part of all of Sarah J's books is Fenrir. Is that how you would pronounce that? Fenrir, who's in the Throne of Glass series?
I think so.
Fenrir?
Maybe Fenris. Is it?
I don't know. But we meet him in the Throne of Glass books, and he's also a very common wolf folklore legend. And my final point about wolves is that there is a legend that the goddess Morrigan, who we know is the character that we meet later in Valaris and who we all fall in love with, she is linked to fertility, land, sovereignty, and kingship. And I think much like Elaine, we've not fleshed out her story yet. And we know that she owns her own land. We know that she was supposed to be a part of the Autumn Court. And knowing that she's linked to land, fertility, and essentially being a queen, I'm excited to see where that goes.
So let's go into chapters 3 and 4, and we'll just kind of start from the beginning of chapter 3. So basically chapter 3 is Feyre, Nesta, and Elaine going to the market, and they encounter, there are two different scenes basically on this whole travel. The first is with the children of the blessed, and then the next one is with Feyre and the mercenary. So let's talk about the children of the blessed.
I actually find the children of the blessed kind of fascinating, and we do see them later on in the books as well. What are they? They're fanatics who worship the High Fae, basically. So they call themselves acolytes, which, here's a fun fact. The word acolyte in Greek means follower or attendant. And in early Catholic leadership, they separated into orders. And there were major orders, which would be like the deacon, the priest, the bishop. And then minor orders, which are the lector or reader, the porter or doorkeeper, the acolyte, and lumped in with all those is the exorcist. I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is very interesting and kind of terrifying.
Exactly. But we also know that they're not well liked by the villagers. These people, they basically think that the children of the blessed are a nuisance. They come on very strong. They basically offer sacrifices to Prythian. Like, they believe that if they send one of their acolytes into Fae territory and then they don't come back, that they have been accepted into the way of life and they become, well off and well treated. But like, everybody knows that they're actually being like eaten or killed or whatever. So it's just kind of weird.
Did you notice that she talks about how they sent a human over and she was a High Fae's bride, and then later talks about how Prythian is such a land of like prosperity and peace? And I'm like, okay, well, that's how you know she has no idea what she's talking about.
Exactly. But the other cool thing I thought about them is when they describe them, they wear silver bell bracelets, which supposedly attract the Fae. and then they wear blue robes, and they're very clean and pristine. And when I thought of that and I pictured that in my mind, do you all know where I'm going with this? A priestess, Ianthe.
Interesting.
So that's where I kind of went with it. I'm like, well, maybe they heard stories because, that's how they learned about the Fae, is basically like lullabies and stories and legends. And that's what they're modeling after, maybe? I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting, the description. It really took me to the priestess and then calling them acolytes and stuff like that.
Well, we do find out later in, I think, Mist and Fury, that Ianthe left Prythian when Amarantha was coming into power, and she and her family were like somewhere else, because I know Feyre has a real problem with that she just like fled basically. So I wonder if Ianthe and other priestesses left Prythian and kind of started their own, like that's where the Children of the Blessed came from. The priestesses who had fled Prythian when Amarantha was coming into power. And maybe that's why they're so similar. I don't know. I just thought about that.
That's a really interesting theory. So it's almost like they were grooming these people to send them people to eat.
I would love to know if that's also who kind of put the fear in people too, because like the whole fear of iron, and it talks about how there's 2 stalls at the market where people are catering to those fears, right? They're selling iron, they're selling little baubles and things like that. And so how did that get into human folklore to make people think like this is what you do to protect yourself?
Of course, we know that none of that does anything.
It does nothing.
And another interesting thing that connects Feyre to the Children of the Blessed, like obviously in this chapter she treats them with complete disdain and she pretty much tells them to fuck off, but later in Wings and Ruin she actually saves some of them from Hybern's niece and nephew, and I forget their names, Dagden and Branna. Yeah. And she also saves one from Hybern's war camp later on, and so we kind of see Feyre's opinion of these people changes. Maybe not her opinion. Maybe she feels sorry for them later on. I don't know. Somehow in her experiences, it changes how she feels about them.
I had a couple of things that I noticed about the whole interaction with the Children of the Blessed too, but I focused, of course, on Nesta because I love her so much. But I noticed that exact same thing. I thought ahead to the other books later on in Feyre, and how she uses her position and her powers to save Children of the Blessed and to save humans. But also this whole interaction to me kind of lays the foundation for Feyre and Nesta and the care that they have for the humans, because we see in book 2 when Rhysand and Feyre and the whole inner circle, they're all talking to the human queens and saying, you need to get your people together. You've got to protect them. And Nesta in particular is so passionate about defending the human lives and not just leaving them all to die to the Fae. And this whole interaction of Nesta being so mad at the Children of the Blessed, like, you are being so stupid. Like, she's being really awful, but she's also like trying to smack some sense into this person of like, you are being so dumb, you are going to die. And one thing that really, there's so much foreshadowing. I'm going to read this really short paragraph and then I'm going to tell you what I noticed. Feyre is, this Children of the Blessed has just told them that she knows somebody that went into Prythian and is now like married to a high fae, like you were talking about a second ago. And so this is Feyre's reaction to that. Inside her head, she thinks, or worse, I thought, if a high fae truly was involved in spiriting a human into Prythian, I had never encountered the cruel human-looking high fae who ruled Prythian itself, or the fairies who occupied their lands, with their scales and wings and long spindly arms that could drag you deep, deep beneath the surface of a forgotten pond. I didn't know which would be worse to face. And I thought, hello, foreshadowing. A high fae bride? Check. Scary wings? We meet some of those later.
Yeah, we do.
Long, spindly arms that drag you down beneath the surface of a forgotten pond. Hello, Court of Silver Flames. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Sarah J, you've done it again. like you were saying earlier, she doesn't do anything on accident. Like I've never noticed that before of, oh my gosh, all of these things happen. And Feyre thinks about it in terms of like, how horrible would that be to be a high fate's bride? Ugh. And then, obviously changes her mind about that later. But I just thought that was really interesting. And I love how that the anger and the passion they feel, like you are just so stupid to the children of the blessed, is really like, we want to help you not be dead. So like, just listen to what I'm saying and do what I'm saying, because you are being dumb. But it's really coming from a place of like caring. So after they talk to the children of the blessed, Feyre has this big long conversation with this mercenary. And what stood out to me is just, this is a very pivotal moment for Feyre, and she just doesn't know it. And I just wonder who is this woman? Who is this mercenary, right?
I wrote that down too, because I want to talk more about Throne of Glass in a minute, but there is, I wrote, who is this mercenary? Because in the Throne of Glass series, there is a character that is spoken to by Queen Aelin. She just doesn't realize it at the time, who significantly changes her life. And you don't find out how she's changed her life until the next to the last book.
I'm trying to remember, but
Mindy, earmuffs. Mindy is about to read this book. So in the Tower of Dawn, Irene was given a note and gold by a woman earlier in her life to help her get out of the dangerous city and move on with her life and build, herself up as a healer. And that person was Aelin.
Yeah.
So, but that happened in Assassin's Blade.
No, I remember that.
Yeah, and so then when we go into Tower of Dawn, Irene talks several times about this person that changed her life. And it was the same thing.
Yeah, like, it's the same kind of conversation.
Yeah. All right, Mindy.
That's interesting.
Unearmuff.
Yeah, I'm really interested. I assume that the mercenary is going to come back at some point, because that just seems to be what Sarah Maas does, right? She brings stuff back that you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that for years and years. But I was trying to kind of suss out who this mercenary could be and where they might have come from. And I couldn't really come up with a theory, because there's, no matter which way I look at it, there's a piece that really makes no sense at all. Because I'm like, okay, maybe she is, working for Tamlin and trying to determine, like, is this really somebody that could help us break this curse? But if that's true, then why does she spend so much time telling her stay away from the forest, stay away from the wall, stay away from all this stuff? Because if she's working for Tamlin, then she would be like, come, let me show you, because they need her to break the curse, right? But if she's working for Amarantha for the same purposes, then why would she not just take her? You know what I mean? Like, if the mercenary knows, if the mercenary is working for Amarantha to try to prevent the curse from being broken, then that was a missed opportunity for that mercenary to do anything to stop the curse from being broken. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the unspoken parts of the curse that maybe aren't talked about, specifically in the book.
I actually saw somewhere, I can't remember where, and I apologize if it's somebody that this is their original theory, but I actually saw somebody kind of throw out that perhaps this mercenary is, what's the name of the girl, not June, but the other friend of Bryce's in Crescent City?
Fury.
Yes, Fury. That possibly she was this mercenary, and like, because she always is going away, and like she's gone for a while, and she's traveling, and I mean, we all obviously know now from Crescent City that you can travel between worlds or whatnot.
The only objection that I have to that theory is that the mercenary, Feyre says it's a mountain of a woman, and isn't Fury described as very like petite, like Amryn, like kind of small?
Yeah, she's supposed to look just like Amryn, from what I understand. So that takes me back. So there's been a lot of discussion about the timelines in these three series. So there's the Court series, there's the Crescent City series, and then there's the Throne of Glass series. And Throne of Glass is the only one that is complete at this point. So I know Sarah J. Maas has said that there wasn't really time jumping at the end of Crescent City, but y'all, she lies all the time. She's not going to give us like crazy spoilers about what she has going on in her head. And when I say you lie, I'm saying you are, it's like fairies. You're not lying. You're just withholding specific truths from us. So one thing I have found really interesting, and I've thought from the beginning that Bryce is not on the same timeline as Prithian because they don't speak the same language, which I think is kind of weird. So I think that Bryce went forward in time, and that, you know, they talk about this treaty from 500 years ago that, you know, has essentially kept the land safe. And part of me really thinks that that has something to do with Throne of Glass. So I want to read this paragraph. So, once long ago, and for a millennia before that, we had slaves to high Fae overlords. Once we had built them glorious, sprawling civilizations from our blood and sweat, built them temples to their feral gods. Once we had rebelled across every land and territory. The war had been so bloody, so destructive, that it took 6 mortal queens crafting the treaty for the slaughter to cease on both sides and for the wall to be constructed. So my thought, and there is nothing in this theory that I could be 100% wrong, but I really think that Throne of Glass happened first. And the reason I think that is because they talk about how they were slaves to the high Fae overlords, which reminds me very much of what's going on with Erewhon, which, Mindy, you're not to this part yet, but reminds me very much of what Erewhon was doing in the Throne of Glass series. Then they talk about how they built these civilizations and there were all these crumbling temples, right? And we know that in Crescent City that they have rebuilt these temples that were from, 1,500 years prior or whatever. So my theory is that Bryce actually time jumps forward because she is part of one of the queens that signed the treaty. And I know last time I said I thought that was the girl's mom, but I'm going to change every time because we notice different things when we read things. But I just found it so familiar that so weird that she used the word slaves, and the only time we've heard that word is in the Throne of Glass series. So I do really very much feel that that is also connected in with these other two worlds somehow, but there's no way they're all on the same timeline. I do think there has been a crumbling of civilization that was built back up again.
But doesn't Bryce say something about the language? Like she kind of knew a little bit of like the old Fae language that wasn't being used anymore in Crescent City, the Crescent City books. So I don't know, like that's a little bit of a...
But then she also, when she goes to Prithian, or I'm sorry, not Prithian, when she goes to Valaris, they have said that language hasn't been used for thousands of years.
Gotcha.
So let's go into chapter 4 because Tamlin, who we don't know it's Tamlin at this point, but we do because we've read it. Tamlin shows up, completely destroys the doorway into the cabin. And then we have this whole interaction between Tamlin, who is in his beast form, his wolf form, and Feyre, Nesta, Elaine, and their father, Daddy Archeron. So
every time you say daddy, it makes him sound super hot. And I have to admit, when I picture Daddy Archeron in my head, he is the father king off of the Disney movie Tangled.
See, I think I picture him like way older than he's actually supposed to be. Because remember in the movie Hook, the guy who loses his marbles, he's like 70 years old. That's who I picture.
He just has a bum knee, Whitney.
I know, right? It's so awful.
Y'all crack me up and I have a totally different take because I cannot call him Daddy Archeron because like you, I feel like he's a sex symbol that way. I call him Papa Archeron. And he's
definitely a papa.
And he reminds, I always picture him like the bumbling dad from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh yeah, that's good. He's probably too old too, honestly. The thing that stood out to me the most was just the family dynamics of it all, because this all of a sudden they're in danger and they all know that they're in danger and they all react in a way that I feel like is very telling of who they are. So you have basically Papa Archeron and Elaine who are like, what do I do? And they just kind of are like frozen in fear. You have Nesta who immediately goes to protect Elaine forget Feyre, forget their dad. And then you have Feyre who stands in front of all of them.
Right, but no one ever protects Feyre. And I remember you had a really good point in the last episode about how we're reading everything from Feyre's point of view. And she does say another body to defend in this. But again, I mean, in her defense, no one ever does try to step in front of her. And there's a point where it says that Tamlin looks over at her and sees how much frailer she is than the other two sisters and thinks she's lying that she did it, which I'm like, well, that also shows that she's always providing for them. And so, I mean, there is a level of resentment that would come with that.
Oh, for sure. And she also, I guess this is the flip side of that. She points out, I think she basically says, Nesta knows Elaine cannot defend herself at all, and Nesta knows that I can. And so to me that read more like, I don't think Feyre believes that Nesta doesn't care about Feyre. It's more, I know that you can handle yourself way better than Elaine can. So you handle yourself and I'll handle her. And I thought that was really, I thought that was generous of Feyre. You know, because in the first two chapters, she's not so generous to Nesta. And she's not so generous to Elaine either. She's got, you know, her resentment is a lot clearer. But in this crisis moment, I feel like the true feelings kind of rise to the top when push comes to shove. And I feel like Nesta and Feyre show a lot of care for one another in this moment of crisis when other stuff just doesn't matter in this moment because they're trying to get through it alive.
To that point, Feyre even says, like, I wish I could just die. Like, I wish I could just give into it and just die right here. But she doesn't. Like, she puts on the brave face. She becomes the protector because she knows that, you know, if she dies, then everybody else does too. She has to try everything she can because that's just her nature.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about this whole conversation with Tamlin, trying to figure out, you said you're the one that killed the wolf, but are you really the one that killed the wolf? Like, do I believe you? Are you covering for somebody? Because they all kind of just let Feyre have this conversation, right? Like, nobody steps in. Nobody tries to take the blame instead of her. And I have a lot of mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, I'm like, nobody is there for her, like you just said, right? Nobody ever steps up. Nobody ever, you know, offers to go hunting. Nobody stands up for her and defends her. But at the same time, I'm like, but really, what are they supposed to do? You know what I mean? Like, it's hard.
That's true.
Well, sort of, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like the fandom gives Nesta and Elaine mostly Nesta, a lot of heat for, like, you know, you just let Tamlin come and take her. And it's like, what was she supposed to do? What could she possibly have done to change anything the way that it happened?
That's a good point.
You know, because they know, hey, this is like a big talking monster. It's probably a Fae. So they are defenseless, really, because, you know, like you pointed out, the charms or whatever at their front door did not work. So, like, all of the tricks that they have, they're not going to do anything. So I don't know. I can't really hold it against them that they don't really do much, because I just kind of feel like, what are they supposed to do besides get themselves killed or potentially get Feyre killed? And I think it was really the smart move to just, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to let this conversation happen and take it second by second and try to get through it, you know?
I'm not sure if you're going to talk on this, so sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, but you said something that reminded me of a phrase I had underlined in chapter 4. You had said that Nesta and Feyre do show each other that they love one another in really weird ways. So as Feyre is leaving, she says, whatever you do, don't marry Tomas Mandre. His father beats his wife and none of his sons do anything to stop it. And then she says, bruises are harder to conceal than poverty, which really sticks with me because we know how worried Nesta always is about looking poor. So if she's saying, like, look, you won't be able to hide this. You can hide being poor easier. That's how she knew she could reach Nesta in that moment.
I'm really glad you brought that up because
You are so welcome.
I really zeroed in on that conversation because there are a couple of things that I really thought a lot about when I was reading this. So the first thing is obviously, Feyre is using her basically like last moments. She kind of thinks that she's like marching to her death at this point. Like if I'm going to be imprisoned or I'm going to be murdered, this is like her deathbed conversation essentially. And she uses that to give Nesta this advice in the best interest of Nesta's well-being. And I just think it's interesting because on the one hand, helping Nesta take care of herself would be go marry that guy so that he will take care of you financially. But Feyre cares more about how Nesta is going to be treated and what that might do to Nesta as a person, and not so much about the financial side of it, which I just think is really interesting. And that's, Feyre is showing Nesta a lot of love. And then the other thing that I did, in my forever quest to justify Nesta is I went and read again the bonus chapter from Mist and Fury, which is Wings and Ember, I think. The bonus chapter that is from Cassian and Nesta's perspectives when Cassian is going to check to see if Nesta's heard from the human queens. And there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of stuff that happens. But in that bonus chapter, we find out that 3 days after Tamlin takes Feyre, 3 days after Feyre says, do not marry this guy, Nesta goes and breaks it off and actually listened to her sister and listened to that advice. And because she breaks it off, he tries to attack her. He tries to assault her. She has to fight him off. She is fighting for, her life in that moment. And that really traumatizes her. And we see later on in Silver Flames, she talks more about that. And I was trying to do the timeline because it was important to me in defending Nesta to know when Tamlin restored their fortune. If it was before that 3 days was over or if it was after.
I was wondering the same thing as you were saying that.
It was after. So, because at first I was like, I bet they had already had their money. And when she found out, we have our fortune back, she went and broke it off with him. But that is not what happened.
See, you guys need to stop hating on Nesta so much.
Right?
You're going to hear us harp on that over and over and over on this podcast.
I just think that says a lot about her, about Nesta, that she listened to Feyre's advice and it was good advice and she should have listened to it. She wasn't, too proud to heed her little sister, and she didn't wait until, she had no idea that Tamlin was going to restore their fortune, right? So she would not have known we're going to be okay financially. She had no idea, but she still took that financial security away from herself because of the kind of person this guy was. And I just think that's really interesting. I hadn't quite put that together before as far as the timeline, because we get these pieces of information. We get some in this first book, we get some in the 5th book, and then we get some in this bonus chapter that some people don't even know exists, right? So I just thought it was interesting.
That chapter.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's so good.
As recommended reading, please read it.
It's at the end of which book? Mist and Fury?
It's a bonus chapter for Mist and Fury, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go look that up. Readers, take heed.
The other thing that I really thought a lot about and noticed from this chapter 4 is just Tamlin in general. Because I'm a Nesta apologist, and I'm also kind of a Tamlin apologist too. But this is a point, Mindy, that you made when we were talking just in our normal lives, not on the podcast, when we were talking about this. And you pointed out something that I had not ever thought about before, is that Tamlin is being motivated by breaking the curse. So Tamlin, he postures this as, I'm going to show you this great mercy. I could kill you, but I'm going to let you live, and I'm going to bring you to my land. I'm going to show you this mercy and not kill you, even though I could. And so, from Feyre's perspective, it is a mercy. Why wouldn't he just kill me? Like, wow, what a great, thanks, Tam.
Well, and when you're reading, he does hesitate. He's like, or you could come back to my lands with me.
Well, and Mindy pointed out when we were talking about this, when we went on our girls trip, he's acting from a place of like selfishness, basically, right? Like it serves his self-interest to keep her alive, to bring her back, and to try to play this out to break the curse. And I thought about that, and I was like, I think for me, I have decided that I can't fault him for that. Some readers take kind of issue with that he's, it was always about saving himself, really, or it was always about what was going to interest him. But I kind of feel like I blame Amarantha for that, not Tamlin. And there's a lot of stuff that he needs to answer for. There's a lot of choices that he makes that are not okay. But for me, this is not one of those. For me, I'm okay with it because Amarantha is the one that has put him in this position where he has the pressure on him to try to find this person that's going to kill a fae with hate in their heart and then fall in love with him and break this curse. Like, he has to figure all that out because it's not just him, right? It's the whole frickin' spring court and their silly masks they have to wear, and it's all of Prithian. But it's not his fault that he's in that position. It's Amarantha's fault. You know what I mean?
Right. And I do know that a lot of people want to have a redemption arc for Tamlin, and I'm not necessarily against that. I do continue, as someone that, is an abuse survivor, I continue to not feel as sympathetic for him with the things that he does after, because those are choices. And hey, grief and abuse and horrible things that happen to people do make us do really questionable things at times. So I do want to say that out loud, and I'm not victim shaming, especially since I'm a victim myself. But having said that out loud, there are some things that he does to Feyre later that are extremely unacceptable.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
I totally agree. And to your point, Whitney, there's so much in that little interaction that shows that motivation, because there's a time that he totally lunges at her, and Feyre calls it a warning. That's what her take on it is. But really, if you think about it, like, he could have killed her then, but he knows he can't. He can't kill them yet because he needs them. And then he also kind of looks around, when you were talking about earlier where he was looking around and saying, well, she's kind of weak. It's probably one of those girls. I mean, he was thinking it was Nesta because of the hate in the heart kind of part of that. Right. I mean, he's looking at the angry one, and saying, well, that's the angry one. Like, this one can't be it. And it's just really interesting, like, the way that he comes on so strong and comes across as this, growling beast, but he does all these weird, like, he seems kind of awkward and weird.
Yeah. And just a sidebar to that, if anyone has, if you're on TikTok, I would definitely go and just search for the videos where people that read these books tell their husbands to growl at them. It is beyond hilarious.
Side note, this is something that I noticed about myself when I'm reading this. I guess I read really fast because in my mind, the first 2 times I read this series, I picture him as like a lion, like with a mane.
Too.
Like, I actually pictured him like Fabio, like with the hair, but like a little sexier. I don't know. But then, like, I read it and he's actually got a wolfish head
with horns.
Yeah.
I was going to change the subject to Papa Archeron. Is that okay?
You can still call him Daddy.
I don't know why. It's more natural to me to call him Daddy Archeron than Papa Archeron. I don't know. But I do think Papa fits him better. But I was going to bring up the dad because there were 2 things that stood out to me in this interaction too. So at one point, Tamlin is saying, like, you murdered my friend. You have to answer for that. And finally, her dad is speaking up and is like, please don't kill my daughter, right? But what he actually says is, please, good sir, Feyre is my youngest. I beseech you to spare her. She is all. But whatever he meant to say died in his throat as the beast roared again. And I just thought that was really interesting because I really want to know what he was going to say.
I took that as, she's the only one that brings us food.
I wondered if that's what he was going to say too. Yeah, because I'm like, she is all that is keeping us alive. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's probably where he was going.
Because if he was going to say she's all that I have from my wife or something like that, he wouldn't have stopped. Yeah. He caught himself by saying something kind of horrible. Yeah. Because we have figured out they do heavily rely on her for everything.
But then that goes against how he acts in the end, which I am totally confused by. Like, I would love to hear what your thoughts are, because I feel like when he's talking to her, he's saying, whatever you do, don't come back here, find a new life. You're made for better than this. Like, so if he really felt that way, maybe he had a change of heart in that 5 minutes
maybe
or
he
whatever.
just realized they were screwed if she left no matter what, so she might as well stay away.
But I'm interested to hear, like, I could not figure out, and I read it over and over, I could not figure out exactly how Feyre felt about what her dad said. Like, I couldn't tell if she was mad or sad or frustrated or like nostalgic. I couldn't figure out. It was very unclear to me what her feelings were about her dad after that.
She definitely gets heartbroken that no one ever comes after her, right? And I mean, for me, reading this, I'm like, well, why'd you expect them to? But she still continues to make sure that they're taken care of. Hold on, Whitney's shushing me. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to point out, we find out later that Nesta went after her. Nesta tells her, I went to the wall. I tried to figure out a way to go across, and I just couldn't figure it out.
Was that in book 7?
No, that's in this book. That's
okay. So
after Tamlin sends her away.
Whitney has like the mind of like a steel trap. And Mindy and I have always said this about her. So you know what? When we get there, I'll be like, oh yeah, she did go for her. But like, I have read, this is my third read of this book, and it's been a while since I've read the first book, and so there are definitely some things I've forgotten about. Well,
but also everything that you're saying is still accurate, because Feyre does not find that out until this is like months later, months after Tamlin takes her, that she finds out that Nesta actually does come after her. So in this moment, in the weeks following her leaving, that is 100% how she feels. Yeah.
Well, and it's validated because she does talk about how like she doesn't necessarily want to go back. She just wants to make sure that they all have food to eat, which she makes, she ensures that Tamlin does that for her family. Like, there's a big part of me that's beginning to think like Feyre doesn't really care about her family all that much outside of the promise that she made for her mother and like this obligation of duty, right? Like, it's almost like, even though Tamlin ultimately is not the right person for her, he does kind of save her from having to be this visionary and savior on her own.
The way that I see that about just how Feyre feels about her family, I think that while she is living in the human world, while they are in poverty and she is basically taking care of all of them, I think that she just does not have the space to love them. I think she's so consumed with trying to keep herself and them alive and feel like she's done right by this promise to her mom that she just doesn't have room for anything else. Because we see later that she does love them, right? Like, we see later in later books, and the way that she treats her family completely changes. And part of that is because of the stuff that they've experienced and the guilt that she feels that she kind of like pulled them into this world that they didn't want to be a part of. And part of that, I think, is that she has more space because she is not constantly on the brink of death all the time.
Well, I said this earlier. There is a level of resentment to being the person that's providing for everyone always, right? And like, she feels like they're not even trying sometimes, and to be honest, they're not. I mean, but there are things, they all have redeeming qualities, right? And sometimes I wonder if in that moment that was their best too. Like, her best may just be a better quality for what they need currently, right? Because she wasn't the best when they had a lot of money. Like, Nesta was the best one. She was the one kind of keeping people at bay and making sure they weren't taken advantage by people that just wanted to be around them for their money. And so she is the best person in that moment, and I think everyone else just kind of crumbled.
I do. I totally agree with you. I think everybody is doing the best that they can. And they're the best that they can is really damaging to the others in their family in different ways, but they don't have any way to kind of change that until the Fae come in and like force them to change that. And I think too, what you were saying, Mindy, about Daddy Archeron at the end there, when he says, don't come back. I actually feel like he is being very selfless in that moment. I think that he is showing his love to his daughter by saying, don't try to come back out of a sense of obligation to us, right? Like, we're going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. It's not all up to you. You have this opportunity to have something better, so take it. Right, which I think is interesting, juxtaposed to the conversation with the children of the blessed, when Feyre and Nesta are like, if you go to Prithian, you're done, you're doomed, nothing. And the dad,
well, most of them are,
right? Well, but the dad is saying you have this chance, so he's trusting that this Fae is not going to kill her as soon as he leaves.
Actually, I think what he's trusting is that Feyre has the ability to escape. And so he's putting his faith in her, not Tamlin. So he knows she'll probably escape and run away.
Just go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because that is kind of exactly what she does. Right?
Sure is.
Like, eventually.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm shuffling all my things.
Is that all of your points, ladies?
No, I actually had a couple of things. One thing that I glossed over, and now I'm kind of wondering about, is the wall where it says it's constructed, and then later on we find out there's like holes in it. And is it invisible, or is it a physical wall?
I always saw it as a invisible barrier, and because they talk about how you can't see where the hole is,
and that's where I went. I mean, in my mind when I first read it, I always thought it was a physical wall, but now I'm looking at this and I see there's like clues that it's actually like magical.
Going on my really great memory for everything that happens in these books, because I've read them like an embarrassing amount of times. In Court of Mist and Fury, when they travel from Valaris to meet with the Human Queens the first time, and Feyre has Azriel carry her, she talks about, I can't see it, but I could feel its power. So I think it's definitely invisible because first of all, they can't see the holes, but she talks about specifically, like, I felt it. I don't know how Azriel knew where he was flying and what, where the gap was, but I could feel the power like clawing at me when we went through it.
Will you put that back in the middle of y'all? Scoot it over a little more, Min. There you go.
Sorry.
No, I totally think that was just me like creating something that wasn't there and then realizing, oh, I was wrong.
Well, I think it's really easy to envision it as a wall that we think of, right? And maybe only certain Fae can see the wall.
True.
Well, at this point, too, we haven't had an opportunity to actually be at the wall, right? Like, as a reader, and Feyre as a character, it's just been talked about. It hasn't been shown to us, so to speak, in the book. So I'm pretty sure when I first read this book that I envisioned it as a physical, visible wall as well, until the book told me that it wasn't. You know what I mean?
Again, we always talk about how Sarah J. Maas doesn't do anything that just is a throwaway. And I kept noticing, like, gosh, she's really, really, like, harping on the whole fact that it's wintertime and it's cold and it's gross. And I finally realized, when her world gets turned upside down, she goes from this winter of a life and of an actual season to the spring court.
Well, honestly, I didn't think we were going to have that much to talk about with these two chapters. And I'm my English teacher heart is happy with everything we pulled out.
You liked it. And if you didn't, so what? You don't have a podcast.
So let's go around and share our nerdiest thing of the week. And I'll go first. My nerdiest thing.
How many do you have this week?
This week, I just have the one.
Oh, I still have two.
Oh, okay. I just have one this week. Well, I could have two, because I did listen to my Twilight soundtracks again on the way over here, like I did last week, to pump me up.
Your nerdiest thing can flow over into the next week.
Yeah, I'll probably do that every single week. But my nerdiest thing is what Deb mentioned earlier. I read the Cruel Prince trilogy. I started yesterday morning, and I finished all 3 books by like 5:30 this evening. So
I would highly recommend. They're by Holly Black.
They're really good. I really enjoyed them a lot. Thank you for that recommendation, Deborah.
You're so welcome. I actually posted an Instagram meme this week that was like, my heart, it was like this guy, like, it looked like it was like a clip art of a guy having like a heart attack, which I know is kind of horrible. And it was like the way my heart feels when you don't read the book I recommended. And I wrote, I'm just doing it for your own good. And I really think that Whitney knows I take that seriously.
Yeah, it was really good. I enjoyed it. So that was my nerdiest thing.
Well, I can go.
Yeah, go ahead, Deb.
So my nerdiest thing, so I'm always going to have our nerdiest cocktail that we've created. And actually, I can't even take credit for this one. This one came from Mindy earlier this week via text message. We have named this the Bloody Wolf, based off chapter 4. And it is UV cupcake vodka, some grenadine, cherries, and pineapple juice. So we will post that on Instagram for everybody. But my second nerdiest thing is, as you get to know me, I do have a design company. And unfortunately, there was a national craft store chain going out of business. And the last one was about 30 minutes from my house. Then it is closing this week. And I spent 3 hours in the store getting ribbon cut and then standing in line to get ribbon at a deeply discounted rate. But for any of you that are crafters, I got it for 12 cents a yard. I got like 330 yards of ribbon for $40, and it doesn't get much nerdier than that. Mindy, what about you?
I don't know. I think I might have you both beat this week because this is really nerdy. So, when you come across like something on Facebook or some article that's like suggested to you. So I got suggested this article, and it took me back to a show that I had watched 11 years ago, and I've been rewatching it. There are only 2 seasons, and this show, it's not Glee, but it's based on Glee. It's called The Glee Project. It is a reality competition to find like the newest Glee cast member. It's actually really fun. They make these videos, but I literally have been binge watching that for like 5 days, and it's super embarrassing. And I know Deborah's gonna like totally.
No, I'm gonna say that I thought you were gonna say the CW show Moonlight, which also only made it 2 seasons, but it was about vampires, so it's right up my alley. Y'all, it is so good. And I think like it was before Twilight and everything. I just don't think the world was ready. So if that main guy on there that's now on Hawaii 5-0, I don't even know if that's still on or not. But if he could go back and make a 3rd season of Moonlight, I would really appreciate it. It was a pretty good show. But I told you guys both earlier that I had a nerdiest thing I couldn't remember. And as you were talking, and I don't know why this made me think of it, I did remember what it was. So I've been getting Facebook targeted by this lingerie company on Instagram. And they had the coolest Medusa bodysuit. It's like snakes that like wrap around.
I have been getting targeted by the exact same ad. That is so funny.
Right. And so I'll have to post on Instagram what the company's called. And I'm so sorry I can't remember what it's called. But it is so cool. And so I ordered that and this like little slip dress thing. What's really rad about it is it's a woman-owned company. Only 5 people run the entire company. They ship out of Brooklyn, New York. And they literally do it all. And so I thought that was so cool. But now all my Instagram targeting is all like goth punk clothing. And so I'm kind of on cloud 9. Go ahead, Whit.
That company, yeah, the company is Thistle and Spire.
Thistle and Spire. Again, woman-owned, 5 people in the entire company.
I want to know what I need to do to get targeted for that kind of shit and not the Glee Project.
Hey, they know their audience, Mindy. All right, Min, can you tell us how to prepare for next week? Or Whitney, y'all, I swear to God, anyone that's listening to this podcast, I'm sitting across from them. They're both whiter than hell. They are both wearing glasses. They have the same hair color. They both laugh loudly. They both make me so happy as a person. I get their names mixed up. I'm so sorry. Whitney, can you please tell us how to prepare for next week?
Yes, next week we are going to be talking about chapters 5, 6, and 7.
For exclusive content and to keep up with all things nerdy, follow us on Instagram at Our Nerdiest Thing. We post book reviews, what to read next, and our cocktail recipes. Have something nerdy that you'd like to share? Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com. This podcast is edited and produced by The Story Guides. Thanks for listening.